In a single clash, the hundreds of war halos of the Beheader army shattered in dazzling explosions. The enormous number of halos the Xuanwu army wielded was not something even a top-class Arab army like the Beheader army could deal with. And with their halos shattered, squelch, 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 swords stabbed into the bodies of the Beheader army soldiers, and when they were pulled out again, the ground was immediately covered in their corpses. This terrifying casualty ratio had the eyes of Abu Muslim and Osman flying open. We can only see how Qutayba's armies do. With this sudden thought, 4 pairs of eyes turned to watch the Blood Beast army and Death army. Of the 3 governors, Qutayba's armies were undoubtedly the largest and the strongest. Qutayba's Revelation army had even managed to cut down the Xuanwu army from 8,000 to 2,000 as soon as it was deployed. If they wanted to defeat the Tang army and shatter its defenses, they could only rely on Qutayba. Get ready. The strongest opponent is coming. Behind the tall steel walls, Wang Chong's eyes flashed. Of all the Arab armies, Wang Chong had been paying the most attention to Qutayba's 3 top-class armies. Amidst the vast sea of Arab cavalry, Wang Chong could pick out at a glance the Blood Beast army and the Death army. The soldiers of these stood out from the rest, their energies as vast as mountains and impossible to ignore. As these 2 armies approached, the tension in the air rapidly increased. Qutayba's armies were the only ones that could alter this situation, and if not even these 2 armies could do this, then the Arabs would be facing complete defeat. Not only that, if they could not gain the initiative in this battle, the Great Tang could use its own top-class armies to hold down Qutayba, Abu Muslim, and the other Arab great generals. The top-class armies would slowly exhaust them while also creating opportunities for the Tang great generals. If one were surrounded by these top-class armies and exhausted too much energy, even someone like Qutayba who had touched upon the subtle realm might be defeated and die. There had never been a single great general who could rely on his own strength to stand against an army of more than 100,000 people. Pass on my order. Deploy the Revelation army. Qutayba suddenly ordered from beneath the fluttering Arabian war banners. Ibak and Osman were at first confused, but then they understood, complicated looks appearing in their eyes. Were these infidel soldiers so powerful that not even Qutayba thought that he could overcome them? It wasn't even the decisive moment, but he was already deploying his most powerful Revelation army. This general will go. A voice came from behind Qutayba, and one of his brigadier generals departed to deliver the order. As Qutayba was sending out his most powerful army, on the front line, the Blood Beast army and Death army had arrived like a vast tidal wave of steel. Ready! With this roar, the air clanged with metal as the soldiers of the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army raised their swords in the air. The soldiers were instantly surrounded by a still and somber air. Across from them, the ground was trembling more and more as 2 powerful storms of energy approached. In the packed ranks of the Arab cavalry, one could see a bloody mist and a thick black mist rapidly charging at them. Charge! The 2,600 Roaring Tiger army soldiers were the first to charge forward from behind the steel walls, their swords held high. Whoosh! As they charged out, the black armored guard in the rear wildly waved the 9-dragon blood war banner. The earth quaked as invisible ripples of energy spread out and attached to the bodies of the Roaring Tiger army soldiers. Clang, clang, clang. The Roaring Tiger army were quickly encased in 7 halos. This army that had already been able to suppress the Fearless army with its own halo now had 6 additional ones, and its strength climbed to nigh unimaginable levels. Ah! There was a scream as an Arab rider and his horse were thrown more than 100 feet into the air by a Roaring Tiger army soldier. More soon followed as the Roaring Tiger army's attacks tossed them into the sky. Each of these Arab horsemen weighed several thousand jin when accounting for their horse, but they were as light as a feather to the 2,600 Roaring Tiger army soldiers. Moreover, the Roaring Tiger army soldiers had sent their fierce and tyrannical stellar energy through their swords into the bodies of these Arab cavalry. By the time they had been thrown into the air, they were truthfully already dead. Boom, boom, boom. The Roaring Tiger army brought chaos wherever it went, slaying innumerable Arab cavalry. This time, the Roaring Tiger army had adopted a completely different strategy. Rather than waiting, it was heading right for the Blood Beast army and Death army. There were only 2,600 of them, but that unstoppable momentum made it seem like there were 20 to 30,000 of them. Hear my order. Until we kill these Arabs, no one is allowed to retreat. The Roaring Tiger Army commander, Du Wuwei, gripped his sword with both hands as his body exploded with killing intent. As an extremely experienced old general who had followed Zhang Shogui through many campaigns, Du Wuwei had not encountered such a powerful opponent in a very long time. The Gogurians, Khitans, Western Turks, and even the Tibetans had only been able to lower their heads and concede to the Roaring Tiger Army. But these Arabs had allowed the Roaring Tiger Army to finally understand what a strong foe was. They had also stimulated the pride and killing intent of Zhang Shogui's finest soldiers. Kill! The more than 2,000 men simultaneously roared, deforming the air as their murderous intent soared. In the midst of this roaring, all the Roaring Tiger Army soldiers charged at the Arabs. Kill them! Leave not one alive! Meanwhile, the approaching Blood Beast Army had also sensed the aura of the Roaring Tiger Army, and its several thousand soldiers swiftly began to ride toward it. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. Rumble! Like two massive waves, the armies collided against each other. No one was able to describe this impact. It appeared like a clap of thunder had exploded right in the middle of the battlefield, drowning out the sounds of fighting, the clashing of weapons, and the neighing of horses. Heavy sword met scimitar with heavy collisions so terrifying that it felt like mountains were ramming into each other. The two powerful armies of the Great Tang and Arabia fell into a stalemate that seemed to last for both a second and for endless epochs. But a moment later, there was a massive roar as countless soldiers and horses were flung into the air. Thud, thud, thud. The bodies of the Blood Beast Army soldiers rained down from the sky and the battlefield exploded into cheers. Great Tang! Great Tang! Great Tang! The names of the Great Tang and the Roaring Tiger Army filled the skies as all the Tang soldiers who witnessed this clash rallied. The Arabs, on the other hand, were deeply stunned. Follow me. No matter what, we must hold them down. A Death Army officer saw this sight and his eyes flashed as he immediately ordered his troops to charge at the Roaring Tiger Army. Everyone, hear my order. Follow me. Behind the steel walls, the more than 1,000 soldiers of the ultimate martial army had been closely watching the Death Army. The moment the Death Army began to pick up speed, the ultimate martial army soldiers raised their swords and surged out from the defense line. Rumble! As the Death Army impacted against the Roaring Tiger Army, the more than 1,000 soldiers of the ultimate martial army charged with terrifying speed into the Death Army. Clang, clang, clang. For a moment, it was not possible to see anything, only to hear the clashing of weapons. Countless men and horses were thrown into the air while countless more fell to the ground in pools of blood. The combined power of the ultimate martial army and Roaring Tiger Army was unimaginably lethal. Even though they were clearly outnumbered, they were actually the ones with the upper hand. Bang! A Death Army soldier charged over with shocking speed, but before he could even get close, a sword instantly stabbed through his knee. As he fell down on one knee, another sword stabbed through his chest and pinned his corpse to the ground. Thump! A foot stomped down on the Death Army soldier's chest and pulled out the sword, then stepped over the corpse to continue onward. Whether it was a contest of speed, strength, agility, or defensive capability, the Death Army had completely lost. In terms of individual strength, the soldiers of the Ultimate Martial Army and Roaring Tiger Army were far above the Death Army. The 7 halos shining on the bodies of the soldiers of these two armies hacked like giant axes through the battlefield, hewing open paths through the Blood Beast Army and Death Army. The Roaring Tiger Army and Ultimate Martial Army won victory after victory, pushing the Blood Beast Army and Death Army back step by step. 800, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. The losses suffered by Qutaybah's 2 elite armies rapidly swelled, and the defense line the 2 armies had built using their advantage in numbers began to show signs of collapsing. Gallop! The moment the Blood Beast Army and the Death Army became mired in a bitter battle, in the distance, dust began to billow into the air. Beneath this cloud of dust was the gleaming golden light of countless golden-armored warriors riding out like a storm. Su Kai took only a single glance before grimacing and turning his head. Lord Marquis, it's the Revelation Army. Although the army had been given a massive boost in power by the 9-dragon blood war banner sent by the Sage Emperor, everyone was still frightened by the dreadful fighting power of the Revelation Army. General Li, I must trouble you again. Wang Chong turned to the black-armored guard behind him. The guard said nothing, only gave a slight nod. Boom! The black-armored guard took a single step forward, causing the entire world to quake around him. For the first time in this battle, the black-armored guard continued to stride forward, leaving the defense line and entering the intense battlefield. The moment he stepped out, the Divine Martial Army, Divine Prison Army, Dragon Stallion Army, Roaring Tiger Army, Ultimate Martial Army, and Xuanwu Army all felt a reaction from the 9-dragon blood war banner. Their 7 halos fused completely with the 9-dragon blood war banner. Once he was completely outside the first defense line, the black-armored guard stopped and turned to glance at Anshi Protector General Gao Xianxia. You should go as well. Gao Xianxia understood and gestured at the Iron Wall Army behind him. A moment later, the 1,700 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army marched out. Whew! The 9-dragon blood war banner waved and an invisible energy immediately engulfed the Iron Wall Army. Clang clang clang. With a metallic clattering, the energies of the 1,700 Iron Wall Army soldiers began to swell. 6 new and different war halos of various colors flowed out from the Iron Wall Army soldiers and swiftly wrapped around their feet. In the blink of an eye, all the Iron Wall Army soldiers gathered beneath the 9-dragon blood war banner, becoming one with the Divine Martial Army, Divine Prison Army, Roaring Tiger Army, Dragon Stallion Army, Ultimate Martial Army, and Xuanwu Army. If one looked down from the sky, one could see that these top-class armies of the Great Tang were all faintly linked together, all surrounding the 9-dragon blood war banner in an awe-inspiring formation. Buzz! Now that all 7 armies had emerged from the steel defense line, light and shadow began to twist over their heads. A massive golden steel, more than 10 meters tall, appeared in the sky. If one looked carefully, one could see 5 mysterious black carvings on this golden steel. These 5 words contained the power of ancient laws, and these 5 words were different from any extant language, seeming to come from a time before even the dawn of human history. Lights flashed beneath the massive golden steel, and suddenly, a massive dragon more than 100 feet long howled out and began to circle around the steel, its contemptful eyes looking upon the vast sea of Arab cavalry. Roar! There was no sound in the air, and yet everyone in a range of tens of thousands of feet could hear the bellow of a dragon. This mighty sound stimulated primordial fear in the depths of everyone's hearts. Nay! Without any warning, the Arabian warhorses reared up on their hind legs in fright. Bastards! What's going on here? The strangeness of their mounts startled the Arab cavalry and made them curse in Arabic. When a formation that used the 9-dragon blood war banner as its center was activated, it would create a faint draconic aura that would intimidate all beasts and warhorses for tens of thousands of feet around it. Nei! In their fright, countless warhorses began to jump around and slam into each other, immediately causing chaos and turmoil. The commander of the Revelation Army swiftly issued his order. Everyone, hear my order. First eliminate the foes of the Blood Beast Army and Death Army, then shatter all the other infidels. This Revelation Army commander was even taller than Li Sai and possessed a pair of astonishingly sharp eyes. In a flash, he had decided on his targets in the Tang Army. Amongst these soldiers, there was no doubt that the Roaring Tiger Army and the Ultimate Martial Army were the strongest, and the Revelation Army strategy was fairly simple and crude. If they could destroy the strongest and best of their foes, they could immediately damage the morale of their foes. A greatly demoralized foe would crumble without even being attacked. This was the reasoning behind the Revelation Army strategy to attack the strong. Clang clang clang. The Revelation Army soldiers pulled out their great swords and aimed them to the sky, creating a forest of golden swords. Whoosh! The golden greatswords were then leveled like spears at the Roaring Tiger Army and the Ultimate Martial Army. As the Revelation Army charged forward, all the other Arab soldiers sought to get out of its way. Meanwhile, the massive rumbling produced by the charging of the several thousand soldiers of the Revelation Army filled the world, drowning out even the sounds of fighting between the Ultimate Martial Army and Death Army. The only sound to be heard on the battlefield was the thundering of hooves. Ready! Even though the Roaring Tiger Army and Ultimate Martial Army couldn't see the Revelation Army, they could hear the thundering hooves and almost instinctively felt danger, their hearts chilling and their minds becoming vigilant. At the same time, beneath the 9-dragon blood war banner, the soldiers of the Xuanwu army turned in shock toward that thick cloud of golden light, their eyes turning red. "It's the Revelation Army," a Xuanwu army soldier hollered. Although they hadn't known what this army was at first, when the battle was over, almost all the Xuanwu army soldiers had come to know the name of their Arab foe. The 8,000 soldiers of the Xuanwu army had been able to fight on equal level against the Beheader army, but when the Revelation army entered the field, they had immediately sustained severe losses. An army of 8,000 was rapidly cut down to 2,000. The battlefield at that time had been a sea of blood dotted with the corpses of the Xuanwu army. Even though they had been able to suppress and even overcome the Beheader army, the sharp swords of the 5,000 Revelation army soldiers had torn through them like they had been made of paper. For the first time, the soldiers of the Xuanwu army had felt a deep helplessness and sorrow. "Everyone on your guard. The Revelation army." The other armies noticed the strangeness of the Xuanwu army and soon saw the Revelation army approaching the battlefield like a golden thunderbolt. In the battle, the Xuanwu army had performed just as well as the other armies, but the Revelation army had pierced right through it. There was no question that it posed an enormous threat to the other armies. Clang, clang, clang. The unique golden armor of the Revelation army clattered on their bodies, getting louder and louder as they got closer and closer, producing a sound like no other suit of armor. "Ready!" A roar echoed over the battlefield. The Revelation army stood at the apex of Arabia as its most powerful army, and when it began to charge, it did so with the power of an avalanche. Any existence that was not on the same level would feel immense psychological pressure from its charge. An army that could completely crush the Xuanwu army was not something ordinary soldiers could deal with. The several thousand Revelation army soldiers shot out of the Arab army like a golden sunbeam and charged at the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army. Clang! The strongest two armies of the Great Tang side only had time to raise their swords and bring them to bear against the swords of the Revelation army. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl as the symbolic golden greatswords of the Revelation army smashed against the human wall of the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army, their weapons intersecting. Boom! The impact of these weapons, each weighing dozens of gene, seemed to cause the entire world to shake and sway. The clash of these two swords was like mountains ramming into each other, two primordial beasts locking heads. Qutayba, Abu Muslim, Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, and even Dalwin Ruozhen and Du Wuxia were paying close attention to this intense battle. This one clash would undoubtedly decide the course of this battle. If the Revelation army could successfully tear apart the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army, then it could rout the rest of the Tang army and bring Tang morale to its absolute nadir. Not only that, it could pierce through the Tang formation and lead the Blood Beast army, Death army, and other Arab armies to cut like a sharp knife through the Tang army and completely shatter it. Everything would be completely different. Bang! With this enormous sound, time returned to its normal speed. As countless people watched, several figures were flung into the air, but more soldiers were forced backward by the charge of the Revelation army, their halos flickering and vibrating. Even with 7 halos, the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army still found it very difficult to stop the charge of the Revelation army. As one of the most powerful armies in the world, the Revelation army had reached a level that ordinary people would find difficult to imagine. Despite being empowered by the 9-dragon blood war banner, the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army still found it hard to reach the Revelation army's level. "Hold!" somebody roared in the middle of the chaos. Thump, thump, thump. After being forced back 7 to 8 steps, the warriors of the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army stomped their feet down, cracking the ground as they rooted their bodies in the earth. "Gather!" There was another roar, and as the Revelation army, Blood Beast army, and Death army charged, the soldiers of the Roaring Tiger army and Ultimate Martial army rapidly formed up into a defensive formation. Buzz! This sight instantly caused the Revelation army soldiers to pale. The charging power of the Revelation Army was unrivaled. Anyone that could not stop its charge only had death to look forward to. But for the Roaring Tiger Army and the Ultimate Martial Army to have reassembled so quickly after being scattered, giving no opportunity for the Arabs to charge, was the first time the Revelation Army had ever seen such a thing. Not only that, even though the Roaring Tiger Army and Ultimate Martial Army seemed to have been suppressed by this charge, only 7 or 8 of them had actually died. In the end, the result inconceivably ended up having more bark than bite. Kill them! In a flash, the Revelation Army reacted. No matter how strong these two Tang armies were, as long as they could not contend against the Revelation Army, they were still doomed. The Revelation Army would slaughter them eventually. The earth once more began to rumble. The Blood Beast Army, Death Army, and Revelation Army, Kataba's 3 top-class armies, gathered together and charged at the Roaring Tiger Army and Ultimate Martial Army. Buzz! But no one noticed that behind the Roaring Tiger Army and Ultimate Martial Army, the Black Armored Guard waved the 9-dragon Blood War banner once more, instantly causing clouds to roil and winds to blow. As thunderclouds gathered, red streams of light tinged with gold shot out from the golden steel, vanishing into the Tang armies. A moment later, the formation came to life. Kill! Before the Revelation Army could finish its charge, there was a massive rumbling and terrifying roar as a new army charged in from another angle. Kill them! Avenge our brothers! The 2,000 Xuanwu army soldiers, their eyes red, plunged into the Revelation Army, Death Army, and Blood Beast Army. At such a close distance, even the Revelation Army was caught off guard. A second later, all was chaos as the two armies fiercely clashed. But this was merely the beginning. The Xuanwu army had no intention of getting caught in a protracted battle. After the fierce collision, the Xuanwu army together with the Roaring Tiger Army and Ultimate Martial Army swiftly departed through the power of the formation. Boom! Another army smashed into the Revelation Army, but this one also immediately fell back. The Divine Martial Army, the Divine Prison Army, the Dragon Stallion Army, the Iron Wall Army, one army after another, powered by the 9-dragon Blood War banner, fleetingly struck the Revelation Army before rolling away like a wheel so that another could take its place. Halos vibrated and the earth quaked. In the face of all these brief strikes, even the Revelation Army was thrown into a momentary disorder. It had no idea who it was facing or which army it should chase. At every moment, an army was turning away while another army was attacking them from the rear. Once, twice, thrice. As wave after wave of attack fell upon it, the Revelation Army was finding it difficult to keep up. In a few short moments, the Revelation Army had been battered around 23 times, and this renowned army could finally take no more. Its ranks in chaos, it began to retreat. At this time, all the soldiers of the Revelation Army had grimaces on their faces. Now is the moment. Wang Chong had been keeping a close eye on the battlefield, and when he saw this sight, he immediately issued an extremely lethal order for the Revelation Army. Chuluwu, go! Wang Chong turned to Chuluwu, who was standing more than 200 feet away. Although Chuluwu was very unconvinced by Wang Chong's abilities and his Tongluo people had their quarrels with him, Wang Chong was the supreme commander on this battlefield. At a crucial moment like this, even Chuluwu had to obey Wang Chong's orders. Chuluwu viciously glared at Wang Chong before immediately looking away and unsheathing his sword. Everyone, follow me. As he was speaking, his horse leapt forward, leading the several thousand Tongluo cavalry in a thunderous charge. Watch out! It's the Tongluo. The sight of the Tongluo charging out had a Death Army officer's pupils constricting in surprise. They had already heard of this army's name from Daluan Ruozhen, and they also knew that these personal guards originating from Emperor Taizong's era had a power that could not be disputed. Rumble! Arab soldiers rushed to change their direction and stop the Tongluo, but they were too late. In a few seconds, the several thousand Tongluo cavalry in their bronze armor had cleaved a path through the Arab army and stabbed into the ranks of the Revelation Army. Buzz! The moment the Tongluo cavalry impacted with the Revelation Army, Wang Chong swung his arm down, gesturing to his left flank at the 3,000-some soldiers of the Azure Martial Army, personally trained by great Tang war god Su Jingchen. With a roar, the Azure Martial Army charged out from the defense line with a momentum that could knock down mountains and reverse the seas. In the past, the Azure Martial Army had been one of the strongest armies under Su Jingxian's command. Even though there had not been enough time to train these soldiers to that unstoppable level that had all the empires on the borders quaking in fear, this army had around 60 to 70% of the original's power. Whoosh! As the final army stepped onto the battlefield, the black armored guard who stood on the battlefield like a god once more waved the war banner. Instantly, two shrouds of energy shot forth, one descending on the distant Tongluo cavalry while the other fell on the Azure Martial Army. The Tongluo cavalry, Azure Martial Army, and Ultimate Martial Army were all armies that had been first established in Tang Taizong's era. As for the armies trained by the great generals like Sishan and Geshu Han, they had inherited training methods passed down all the way from Taizong's era. Even Wang Chong's privately trained armies, the Divine Martial Army and Xuanwu Army, were trained using methods that had been taken directly from Taizong's era. After an interval of more than 100 years, the 9 most powerful armies under Emperor Taizong's command gathered together to the west of the Tsong Mountains for the first time. And after more than 100 years of obscurity, the 9-dragon blood war banner once more displayed its glory. As the winds blew and thunderclouds churned, the 9-dragon blood war banner made these two already formidable armies rapidly swell in strength. The rumbling reached an unprecedented level, and it felt like the entire world was about to fall apart. The constantly rotating attacks of the 7 elite Tang armies, along with the attacks of the Tongluo cavalry and the Azure Martial Army, completely shattered Katebua's Revelation Army. Ni. The Revelation Army soldiers' faces were stricken by fear as they felt for the first time a feeling of helplessness, like they were sinking in the middle of a deep ocean. Break the spear at the sharpest point. This was the rule the Revelation Army followed in warfare. It had been right for all of the opponents the Revelation Army had faced in the past, and it was right for the nature of the Revelation Army. Bang! A Revelation Army soldier was too slow to retreat and was swiftly surrounded. In a few short moments, 6 to 7 swords had slashed down at his body. Even though the Revelation Army soldiers were all incredible fighters and had been equipped with the best weapons and armor Kateba could provide, they still found it difficult to block so many destructive attacks. Aya! There was a miserable scream as the Revelation Army soldier vomited blood and toppled to the ground. Plush! As this Revelation Army soldier fell, a sword stabbed through his throat. A few moments later, a silver war boot stepped over his corpse as it headed toward another Revelation Army soldier. 500, 600, 700, 1,000. 1,000 Revelation Army soldiers had died in this brief period, their corpses scattered across the ground. And as the Revelation Army soldiers were cut down, so were large swaths of the Blood Beast Army and the Death Army. The Tang top-class armies all had 7 dazzling halos around the bodies of their soldiers, and with the entry of the Tongluo cavalry and the Azure Martial Army, they now had 9 halos. The 20,000-some top-class Tang soldiers swept over the battlefield with an unstoppable momentum. This time, it was not merely the Revelation Army and Blood Beast Army. All the Arab cavalry, including elite armies such as the Beheader Army and Tiber Army, were in the range of the 9-dragon blood war banner formation's attacks. Defeat was sweeping through the Arab ranks like a landslide. Nay! The Arab soldiers yelled out in fear as they were brought down. Bloody mist floated in the air while rivers of blood irrigated the lands to the west of Talas. This was a land of mayhem and death, a hell on earth. Fast. Too fast. There had been only a few moments between the time the Tongluo cavalry had begun to attack and the rout of the army. Arab corpses littered the battlefield, and even the godlike and invincible Revelation Army had sustained heavy losses. In the distance, the area underneath the 4 black war banners was deathly still. Osman, Ibak, and Ziad all had faces of complete shock, unable to believe what their eyes were seeing. At the height of the Arabian Empire's power, with so many of its elites gathered, 3 governors and hundreds of thousands of soldiers, it was being defeated by a force of merely 20,000 from a trifling empire of the Eastern world. None of the Arab commanders had foreseen this. From a distance, they could see the hand-picked Arab cavalry, the finest in the empire, being thrown into the air like ragdolls by the 20,000 Tang elites. These Tang elites only needed to wave their swords to cleave an Arab horseman weighing several thousand jin in two and send body parts flying dozens of meters. Although the Arabs had the advantage in numbers, no number of soldiers was capable of stopping these Tang. Those dazzling miniature formations around the bodies of each Tang soldier were rapidly resonating and outshining all other armies on the battlefield. No matter how many Arab cavalry charged forward, they were just ants trying to shake a tree and were easily thrown aside. Retreat! Pass on my order! All soldiers, retreat! At this moment, even Abu Muslim had an extremely dour expression. For an army of more than 200,000 soldiers to be forced into this situation was something that Abu Muslim had never imagined in his worst nightmares. At the very worst, Abu Muslim had expected the Arabs to be at a slight disadvantage, but for some inexplicable reason, this was no slight disadvantage but a complete rout. If they didn't retreat now, the Arab losses would be even larger. Abu Muslim was known as the governor of iron and blood, and was famed for his proactive and fierce assaults, never retreating until he had completely overrun his opponent. But Arab morale had fallen to its lowest level. If they did not retreat now, all of Arabia would suffer an unbearable consequence. Gallop! An Arab horseman quickly turned around to deliver Abu Muslim's order. Wait a moment! At this moment, an aloof and emotionless voice rang out in everyone's ears. Everyone shivered at these words and turned toward Qutayba. Even Abu Muslim looked over. The Blood Beast Army, Death Army, and Revelation Army were all armies under Qutayba's command. If there was one person who had lost the most in this battle, it was undoubtedly the governor of war. It was so quiet that one could hear a needle drop. Everyone was waiting for Qutayba's order. The 9-Dragon Blood War Banner. Close to the Arabs, Dalwin Ruozan suddenly spoke. What? Dalwin Ruozan's words caused everyone around him to turn their gazes to him. That war banner is the 9-Dragon Blood War Banner. Dalwin Ruozan repeated himself, his eyes flitting over the battlefield to rest on that ancient war banner snapping in the wind. In the Great Tang, more than 100 years ago, in Taizong's era, there was a Tang war banner forged from deep-sea Xian metal and the cores of meteors. This war banner can control 9 top-class armies and also layer their halos over each other, allowing a single army to possess 9 powerful halos at once. It was precisely because of this war banner that the Great Tang was invincible on the battlefield, allowing it to defeat the Turkic Khaganate and divide it into 2. At the same time, it was also able to defeat the Goguryeo Empire, Mengshi Zhao, the Shi, the Khitans, and even our Yusang. Thus, the earliest legends of the Great Tang's Golden Age were formed. It was also in that era that the Great Tang became acknowledged as the strongest country on the continent. Dalwin Ruozan sternly said. Dalwin Ruozan was far less capable a martial artist than the generals, but he was an erudite scholar who knew the histories, stories, classics, and even unofficial histories of the surrounding countries like the back of his hand. The glorious past of Tang Taizong's era had quietly faded away, with not even many people in the Great Tang knowing about it. But through several precious texts Dalwin Ruozan had found, including the war records of various countries from several hundred years ago, he had come to learn of this matter. The 9-Dragon Blood War Banner. There was no question that this was an inextricable part of Tang Taizong's invincible legend and glory. The Great Tang's true #1 ritual tool. 9 powerful armies combined with the legendary 9-Dragon Blood War Banner would make even a powerful existence like the Revelation Army fall back in defeat. The Arab defeat was completely understandable. The Tang army was no longer some simple peacekeeping force. Before everyone's eyes was that most glorious and most formidable army of the distant past. Its true appearance was perhaps far more powerful than all of them could see, know, or even imagine. Dalwin Ruozan's expression instantly became extremely grave. Now that this war banner of the Great Tang had appeared on the battlefield, the nature of the war had completely changed. If those records are correct, we must seize the 9-Dragon Blood War Banner. Otherwise, there will be no chance whatsoever of winning the battle on the ground. Dalwin Ruozan's gaze flitted over the vast army and immediately spotted that giant figure holding the red and black war banner. Slowly, his eyes began to sharpen. Killing the banner holder was the only hope of turning this defeat into a victory. Meanwhile, on the other end, after what seemed like both an instant and innumerable years, Qutayba icily spoke. "Pass on my order. Anyone who retreats, dies." Everyone was left flabbergasted by his order. No one had expected Qutayba to still persist, even after his revelation army had been routed. Moreover, he was having the entire army hold its ground. But as the strongest existence on the Arab side, Qutayba could not be lightly defied. "Destroy that war banner and everything will naturally come to an end." Qutayba's voice resounded in everyone's ears. Top-class great generals all had extremely sharp eyes. Although Qutayba did not know about the formations of the Central Plains, he had reached the same conclusion as Dalawan Ruozan at almost the same time. Everything instantly fell silent as they turned to look at the battlefield. As they stared at that enormous black and red banner snapping in the wind, the mood instantly became strange. Arabia didn't have this kind of large-scale formation, but if everything was really as Qutayba had said, they had no need to withdraw. Clang! As everyone was still considering Qutayba's words, the man himself had already reached behind himself and pulled out his mighty golden greatsword that had awed all of Arabia, God's might. Clop clop, Victor, Qutayba's warhorse, galloped into the distance. The Arab army instantly parted, opening a path for Qutayba. The soldiers in the rear had become unsteady and uncertain due to the rout on the front line. But the somewhat disorderly army was instantly pacified by Qutayba's appearance. No matter the occasion, Qutayba would always have an extremely important status in the Arab army that no one else could fill. As long as Qutayba was present, the Arab soldiers would firmly believe that Arabia could never be defeated. Buzz! As that golden figure began to ride out from the distance, the atmosphere immediately became tense. "Lord Marquis, Qutayba is moving out." A messenger turned his head to Wang Chong, his voice fraught with tension. The name of Qutayba had an incredibly intimidating effect on all the Tang soldiers. Even now, they all still remembered how Qutayba had single-handedly overturned more than 1,000 steel walls and suppressed 4 great generals. Even though the Great Tang now had the upper hand, using the 9-dragon blood war banner to completely quash the Arab soldiers, no one dared to say that this formation could resist Qutayba's attacks. No one behind the steel wall said anything, but the atmosphere was brimming with anxiety. "Chong-er, leave this Qutayba to me." An elderly yet energetic voice rang in everyone's ears as a black figure shot past the corner of Wang Chong's eyes and appeared in front of him, stalwart and dignified. "Master!" Wang Chong blurted out after a moment of shock. The fierce winds blew the demonic emperor old man's robes here and there and caused his long hair to dance. Wang Chong couldn't see the demonic emperor old man's face, but he could see his tall and erect back, a solid and imposing mountain. When Qutayba had ridden out from beneath the black war banners, everyone had felt a slight unease, all of them a little worried. But when the demonic emperor old man stepped forward, these concerns vanished. Even Gao Xianji and Chang Qianli calmed down. Rumble, gallop. Qutayba was getting faster and faster, the golden light around him getting thicker and thicker. And as Qutayba poured more energy into his warhorse, its every step became as loud as a clap of thunder. As Victor charged forward, it drowned out all other noise with the rumbling of its approaching storm. "It's Lord Qutayba." On the battlefield, more and more Arab soldiers were beginning to notice, and soon all of them began to cheer. The name Qutayba shook the heavens as the dispirited Arabs rallied once more. "Qutayba! Qutayba! Qutayba!" The cheers of the soldiers became louder with each wave, eventually so loud that it suppressed even the sounds of fighting. At this moment, even Dalawan Ruozan and company couldn't help but be surprised as the battle intensified once more. Although the 20,000 top-class Tang soldiers still had the upper hand, sweeping unstoppably through the Arab cavalry, the Arabs that were showing signs of collapse had regained their footing. Buzz! At this moment, the demonic emperor old man's robes shook as she stepped forward. His expression was relaxed and indifferent, as if he was taking a leisurely stroll through a garden, not an intense battlefield. The demonic emperor old man didn't seem to be moving very fast. In fact, he appeared to be moving rather slowly. But in the blink of an eye, He had walked past the steel defense line and entered the battlefield. Bzzz. Space twisted around him and light flashed, and when the demonic Emperor Old Man appeared again, he was more than 100 feet away. Even someone of Wang Chang's cultivation level couldn't see just how he had disappeared. Kill him! The sight of this unarmored demonic Emperor Old Man, dressed in a simple black robe, made two Arab horsemen believe that they had found an opportunity. Their eyes turned savage as they charged at the demonic Emperor Old Man from the sides. But a moment later, when they were still several feet from the demonic Emperor Old Man, the two muscular and vigorous Arab horsemen crashed into an invisible barrier. Not only that, the two Arab horsemen felt like they had been frozen in the air and immediately became incapable of moving. Their eyes could still move, and one could see a deep dread within them, but the rest of their body might as well have been made out of stone. Meanwhile, the demonic Emperor Old Man swept past them without even a glance, as if he hadn't even noticed them. 1 step, 2 steps. The demonic Emperor Old Man was already gone, but the two Arab horsemen still couldn't move. Boom! After some time, there was an enormous boom as bolts of energy shot out from their backs. These bolts of energy were not transparent and colorless, but exactly the same shade as blood. Thud! Thud! The two dropped to the ground in clouds of dust and died. The demonic Emperor Old Man had already cultivated the myriad spirit sea art to its peak and reached a stage that normal people could not fathom. Not even when they died did these two Arab horsemen understand how the demonic Emperor Old Man that they had never even touched had managed to kill them. Boom! 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 As he walked through the living hell of a battlefield, he was constantly assailed by clueless Arab cavalry, but before any of them could get close, they would be thrown more than 100 feet into the air by mighty explosions. Some of them even flew as high as 100 meters, and by the time they came down again, they were already dead. In front of a terrifying expert like the demonic Emperor Old Man, these so-called elites were far too weak. The demonic Emperor Old Man didn't even need to touch them to snuff out their lives. Such enormous strength even moved the Arab and Tibetan great generals watching from a distance. Just where did this man come from? Even Qutayba is rather cautious with him, Ibak sternly said. He still remembered how when Qutayba first took action, sweeping aside all opposition and almost single-handedly suppressing the Tang army, the mysterious black-robed old man had appeared, dashing the Arabs' hopes of victory. And a powerful existence like Qutayba had unexpectedly not immediately attacked this black-robed old man, instead staring at him for a long time. This was simply unthinkable for someone of his personality. It had to be known that Qutayba didn't even treat fellow great generals like Abu Muslim or Ibak with much respect. His style was always extremely domineering, and it was basically impossible to stop him when he was furious. There was no question that this mysterious black-robed old man had reached that same level of power. I don't know. In the current situation, we can only believe in Qutayba. If not even he can defeat that man, then we won't be able to do a single thing. Abu Muslim continued to focus his gaze on the battlefield. Hiya! He suddenly rode out from beneath the black war banners. Ziad, Ibak, Osman, you all heard what Qutayba said. No matter what, we must seize that banner or kill the person holding it. If we want to end the situation, we must destroy the Tang formation. Abu Muslim gripped the reins of his horse and vanished into the army. Yes. Ziad took in a deep breath, his expression turning grave as he glared at the opposing Tang army. As long as these Tang soldiers had not reached this level of cultivation on their own power and were relying on a ritual tool, they just needed to destroy the tool and could still salvage a victory from this battle. Nearby, Daluan Ruozen gave his own order, his blue robes flapping in the wind. Huoshu Huaitsong, Dusong Mangpoj, get ready. Qutayba and Abu Muslim have already stepped onto the battlefield. They will probably need our strength in this battle. Countless thoughts flitted through his profound eyes. With the appearance of those two mysterious old men on the Great Tang side, the situation had completely changed. The Arabs alone would find it very hand to gain the upper hand in a battle of great generals. Since they were allies with a common enemy and objective, it was only appropriate for the Tibetans to lend a hand. Understood. Huoshu Huizong pressed his right hand against his saber and took 2 steps forward. At the same time, Dusong Mangpoj also rode forward on his horse. The atmosphere on the battlefield grew even more tense. On the other end of the battlefield, Gao Xinji's eyes flashed as he saw Abu Muslim ride out. Wang Chong, Qianli, leave Abu Muslim to me. The 2 of you can deal with the rest. The 2 silently nodded in agreement. With no hesitation, Gao Xinji galloped out. On the battlefield, the 20,000 Tang elites were continuing to sweep over the battlefield, bolstered by the power of the 9-Dragon Blood War banner. The Great Tang still had the initiative in this battle, but even the Tongluo commander Chiluwu had noticed the enormous shift taking place on the battlefield. In the distance, Kuteba and the demonic Emperor Old Man were getting closer, saturating the air with tension. 100 feet, 60 feet, 50 feet. At a distance of around 20 feet, both of them coincidentally stopped at the same time. One was riding upon a mighty steed, a god descended to the mortal world. The other was dressed in wide-sleeved robes, and though he was not as dazzling as Kuteba, his imposing figure was like the loftiest mountain in the world, enough to make anyone stop and look up in wonder. Their eyes reflected the figure of their opponent, and both of them stood still. Buzz! Powerful energies howled out from their bodies. Although neither of them had attacked yet, everyone around them could sense the dangerous aura hanging around them. At some point, all the surrounding soldiers had unwittingly receded to fight elsewhere, leaving a large open space around the pair. Kill! After some time, there was a massive shout as Arab cavalry charged in with their scimitars. For the governor! Kill this Tang! Brash cries in Arabic rang in the air. Kuteba had extremely high prestige within the army, and when the Arab horsemen saw that the 2 were in a stalemate, they sensed a chance and decided to use their advantage in numbers to swarm the demonic Emperor Old Man and create an opportunity for Kuteba. At this sight, the demonic Emperor Old Man finally moved, but all he did was raise an eyebrow. His hands remained hanging motionless at his side. Boom! 3 feet around the demonic Emperor Old Man, the air began to vibrate, condensing into tens of thousands of bolts of energy that exploded outward. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Before those elite Arab horsemen were able to reach the demonic Emperor Old Man, they were shot through by those terrifying bolts of energy, their finely crafted armor crumpling like paper and shattering into pieces. Buzz! At this moment, the air suddenly thrummed with dreadful killing intent. Seated upon his warhorse, Kuteba clenched the fingers of one hand and instantly attacked. Boom! A vast stream of golden sword chi immediately rose out of the earth, piercing through the heavens. For a moment, it felt like the sky itself had been cut in 2, a mirror-like wound appearing on its surface. It was only at this moment that a thunderous boom could be heard. Kuteba struck with extreme speed as well as extreme weight. As this beam of sword chi descended, it was as heavy as a mountain. Even a fortress would be cut in 2, much less a creature of flesh and bone. Almost immediately after Kuteba attacked, the demonic Emperor Old Man responded to this mountain-sundering strike. The demonic Emperor Old Man did not use any kind of weapon, instead swinging out with his palm of flesh and bone. Suddenly, the air exploded with thousands of shockwaves. Tens of thousands of bolts of energy of differing lengths had appeared around the demonic Emperor Old Man, enclosing him in a massive forest of energy. If one looked carefully, one would notice that every pore of the demonic Emperor Old Man was spewing energy. Buzz! The demonic Emperor Old Man had a serene expression as he extended a single finger. Hundreds upon thousands of these energy bolts immediately fused together into a massive sword that flew at Kuteba and the enormous heaven-cleaving sword chi he had unleashed. Rumble! No one could describe the moment those 2 breathtaking attacks clashed. Dust exploded, rising more than 1,000 feet into the air and engulfing the entire area. Ah! There was a terrible scream as all the Arab cavalry within several thousand feet of the clash between the demonic Emperor Old Man and Kuteba were dealt a destructive blow. The explosive shockwave created by their clash immediately threw these Arab horsemen around like they were leaves in the autumn wind. Thousands of them were tossed around in a violent sandstorm, their faces filled with fear as they were swept aside. Some of the horsemen were even thrown far away to crash into the ground. Thud, thud, thud. A few moments later, the stony ground cracked apart while blood flowed like a waterfall. The soldiers howled for the last time as their corpses were scattered across the field. In the center of this battle, the churning dust not only did not settle, but intensified, sending clouds of dust soaring higher and higher into the sky. In the middle of this ever-thickening cloud of dust, a golden figure was battling with a black figure. Boom, boom, boom. Golden beams of sword chi cleaved through the heavens, stabbing through the dust and thrusting at the clouds. At the same time, uncountable bolts of fierce energy, more frightening than if they had been real swords or sabers, were exploding in every direction. The level the demonic Emperor Old Man and Kuteba had reached was far beyond what ordinary people could imagine. Even the great generals who stood at the peak of martial artists couldn't help but be cowed and shocked by this battle, a sense of inferiority instilled in their hearts. Fwum! It took only a second for a golden beam of sword chi, the energy bolts of the myriad spirit sea art, the dust, and the gravel to create an enormous storm, a vast tornado that spiraled into the sky. Bang, bang, bang. One shockwave after another exploded outward, rendering this area the most dangerous on the battlefield. Retreat, retreat! The Arab cavalry, alarmed and panicked, pulled on the reins of their horses and began to flee outward. These two. How? At this moment, Huashu Huaitsong and Dusong Mangpoj were deeply stunned, their fists tightly clenched. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, they would have found it very difficult to imagine that the battle between these two could reach such a level. Even for great generals, the level that Kuteba and the mysterious old man had reached clearly transcended beyond their ken. As the entire battlefield was stunned by the battle between this pair, an imposing and stalwart figure was approaching. When they were still some several dozen feet from each other, Abu Muslim pulled on the reins of his own horse and spoke in rough Tang language. Gao Xianji, we meet again. Do you think that you can stop me? The two were old foes, and their conflict could be considered to have lasted 4 months now. Gao Xianji also had some measure of understanding of Abu Muslim. But you've already lost. Gao Xianji faintly smiled. The Revelation Army had been defeated, as had the Death Army and Fearless Army. If all went as expected, if this trend continued, the Great Tang would emerge victorious. Ha. To borrow an expression from you people of the Central Plains, it's still not decided who will kill the deer. Abu Muslim grinned. Moreover, you are still no match for me. This was not their first battle, and their previous battles had already proven that Gao Xianji could not contend against him, which would naturally still be the case. It was simply impossible for Gao Xianji to stop him on his own. Gao Xianji smiled and said, Heh, since you know a few expressions of the Central Plains, I'll give you another. Don't laugh until it's over. He had heard from Wang Chong the saying, he who laughs last, laughs best. Buzz. Abu Muslim's eyes suddenly chilled and exploded with killing intent. Without the slightest hesitation, Abu Muslim put on the special gauntlet, the Eye of the Demon God, and punched. Asmodee's fury. Abu Muslim immediately used the supreme technique of his 72 Demon God Pillars art. When Abu Muslim had unleashed this attack wearing the Eye of the Demon God, even the consecrated had staggered backward. Abu Muslim might not have been as strong as Kuteba, but there was no question that he was ranked amongst the best. At the very least, the people who could contend against him in the Great Tang could be counted on one's fingers. Rumble. The sky suddenly dimmed as Abu Muslim's body vanished, replaced by a 3-headed demon god covered with purple-black scales. This massive demon god stood on the earth and threw a fist as large as a mountain at Gao Xianji. This fist was unstoppable, stirring up fierce gales for 1,000 feet around it as it thundered through the air. Thump, thump, thump. The winds even swept up the corpses of the Arab cavalry and pushed them to the side. Ha! Gao Xianji's eyes flashed while a faint smile appeared on his lips. 8. Ultimate. Sunderings. Art. Gao Xianji bellowed, his every word like a peal of thunder. As Abu Muslim looked on in shock, Gao Xianji vanished in a gust of wind. Rumble. A second later, a dazzling bolt of lightning appeared several dozen feet above, where Gao Xianji had originally been, and Gao Xianji emerged. Around him, light and shadow condensed into 8 massive pitch-black columns. Mysterious characters had been carved into the 8 pillars, and in the center of these 8 mysterious pillars, space distorted and twisted. Suddenly, a miniature model of the continent appeared. Everyone immediately felt a weighty and prodigious aura, as if this was not simply some illusion but was linked to the earth itself. The 8 ultimate sunderings art was the technique that Wang Chong had given him previously, but also a technique that had been born out of his own 6 ultimate majesties god technique. The two had the same origin. When martial arts reached a certain level, they were no longer restricted to merely transforming a certain type of weapon. For instance, Wang Chong could use a sword, but he could also use a spear, or when he transformed into the god King Yama, he could use a Vajra pestle. Gao Xianji's 6 ultimate majesties god technique primarily focused on sword chi, but when it was improved to the 8 ultimate sunderings art, it no longer needed weapons. But though this supreme technique was powerful, it was extremely difficult to cultivate. At the very least, the Gao Xianji of back then had managed to comprehend its principles, but not even at the end of his life had he succeeded in training in it. Even though Wang Chong had given him a month to cultivate this technique in seclusion, Gao Xianji had still not completely learned the technique. It was only when the demonic emperor old man arrived and Gao Xianji had the opportunity to ask him some questions late in the night, thus understanding the nature of qi, that he finally comprehended the 8 ultimate sunderings art. Humph. Do you think that you can contend against me with this? Abu Muslim's eyes went cold as the Asmodee's fury that he had sent out suddenly turned and rumbled toward Gao Xianji in the sky. At the same time, Gao Xianji opened the fingers of one hand, and the 8 black pillars immediately shot out and spread out around Abu Muslim. When Abu Muslim's Asmodee's fury was still several dozen feet from Gao Xianji, suddenly, without any warning, his strongest technique was frozen in the air. How could this be? Abu Muslim was greatly startled by this sight. His fist energy was inherently formless and shapeless, was not something that could be grasped like a saber or sword. For Gao Xianji to be able to freeze it in the air was a feat that completely overturned Abu Muslim's understanding of the world. As this thought flitted through Abu Muslim's mind, the 8 pillars suddenly exploded with power. With a massive boom, the punch that Abu Muslim had unleashed with all his power splintered apart and exploded into nothingness. Fierce winds swept down from the sky. Abu Muslim's face was grimacing and twisting as he stared at this sight. Never had he imagined that Gao Xianji would learn a new technique in the space of a single month. These 8 strange pillars had somehow been able to completely shatter his most powerful attack. Abu Muslim, that was then and this is now. No matter what you plan to do, as long as I'm here, you will never succeed. A voice as loud as thunder came down from the sky. Gao Xianji stepped forward, and as he did, a majestic sword chi exploded from his feet. The sword chi condensed into another pillar covered with mysterious characters, floating in the air and holding him up. The sky was a forbidden ground for martial artists, but the current Gao Xianji could traverse it like flat land. With this single step, Gao Xianji's understanding of the 8 ultimate sunderings art increased. The principles of martial arts and sword chi were constantly flowing through his mind and his energy began to swell with it, bursting out like a storm from his body. The already powerful Gao Xianji instantly broke through some sort of bottleneck and reached an even higher level. The Gao Xianji of the present finally had the right to duel with Abu Muslim. All was silent as Abu Muslim looked up at Gao Xianji. He could sense his foe's energy soaring and his face immediately became ashen and grim. Huashu Huaitsong go. Seeing that Qutayba and Abu Muslim had been stopped, Daluan Ruozan immediately gave his order, his eyes flashing. In this battle, it wasn't just the fate of Arabia, but the fate of Yusang that was also at stake. No matter what, they had to defeat the Great Tang, and if they wanted to destroy the Great Tang's 9 dragon blood formation, they needed to send out their great generals. Understood. Huashu Huaitsong nodded and immediately galloped onto the field, hurtling at the black armored guard like an approaching storm. Chong'er, leave Huashu Huaitsong to me. A dignified and composed voice came from behind Wang Chong. Wang Yan had at some point walked up, and his eyes shone with a sharp light as he stared at the distant Huashu Huaitsong. Before Wang Chong could reply, Wang Yan had already walked out of the defense line. A force of disciplined infantry followed closely behind him. "Wang Chong, I will go to help General Wang," Su Hanshan said in his cold and aloof voice as he walked up to Wang Chong's side, staring at Wang Yan's back. Wang Yan was Wang Chong's father, and though Su Hanshan did not doubt Wang Yan's strength, there was no harm in being cautious. The 5,000 ballistae would have an intimidating effect on the Arab cavalry. This was even more so now that the situation had changed. The 9-dragon Blood War banner had given the Great Tang the complete initiative over the battlefield, and the war banner would only make the terrifying war machines of the Great Tang even stronger and more intimidating against the Arabs. Wang Chong took stock of the situation and nodded. Now was the moment. The Great Tang had been in a defensive position throughout this battle, constantly waiting for attacks on its extensive line of steel walls. But now was the time for a counterattack. The Great Tang could now go on the offensive. Creak, creak. There was a loud creaking as ballista bolts were loaded, and Su Hanshan led his 5,000 ballistae past the steel walls to follow Wang Yan's infantry. Release! Before the Arab cavalry could begin charging, Su Hanshan swung his hand down. A cloud of ballista bolts immediately flew over Wang Yan's army, past the 20,000 Tang elites and the 9-dragon Blood War banner, and struck the Arab army. Squelch, squelch, squelch. Blood exploded and screams filled the air as the sharp ballista bolts pierced through countless Arab cavalry. Advance! Su Hanshan waved his sword as he ordered his men to advance over the corpse-covered ground. Under his command, the 5,000 ballistae had been arranged into a hedgehog formation. The ballista army had very little in the way of defense, and one had to remember that the soldiers Su Hanshan had trained were former bandits and brigands. If the enemy suddenly got close, the ballista army was certain to suffer terrible losses. But under Su Hanshan's command, even the best soldiers of the Great Tang would find it a difficult task to get past the firing zone of the ballistae. The sharp and vicious attacks of the ballistae served as the best defense. Once his ballista army had reached the vicinity of the 9-dragon blood formation, Su Hanshan swung down his sword and gave another order. Fan distribution. The 5,000 ballistae spread apart like flowing water, perfectly encompassing the 9-dragon blood formation and Wang Yan's infantry. Together, the three forces formed a tight and powerful defensive system. Even though Su Hanshan's strength was still lacking, in terms of strategy and tactics, Su Hanshan was already showing the traits of a future great general who could hold his own on the battlefield. Wang Yan cared little for what was going on behind him. The sight of that familiar figure caused him to urge his horse into an even faster gallop. Bzzz. Light flashed, and Wang Yan suddenly vanished, replaced by a pitch-black light that swelled rapidly. Roar! There was a heaven-shaking roar as a gigantic golden-armored god appeared on the battlefield. His every stride covered tensome meters as he strode toward Huashu Huaitsong. The golden-armored god exuded an extremely powerful aura, and its massive body made all the Arab elites on the battlefield seem like insignificant ants. On the other side, Huashu Huaitsong's brow rose as he saw that massive mighty miracle god and heard the crescendoing rumbling of the earth. Immediately, he used the Vairocana Buddha golden body mantra. In the blink of an eye, a massive Buddha shining with golden light appeared on the battlefield. As he gazed at Wang Yan, Huashu Huaitsong exploded with an astonishing will to fight and began to charge even faster onto the battlefield. At almost the same time, Wang Yan's eyes flashed with cold light as he controlled the mighty miracle god to increase its speed. Boom! 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 He began to stride toward Huashu Huaitsong's golden Buddha. The two mortal foes from the southwest met once more on the foreign battlefield of Talas. One regarded Huashu Huaitsong as a longtime foe and invader of the Great Tang, a bringer of disaster, and a powerful great general. The other had sworn to wash off the shame of the War of the Southwest. Rumble. A moment later, the world seemed to be torn apart as the gigantic figures of Huashu Huaitsong and Wang Yan collided. Winds exploded, blowing dust and gravel in all directions, while powerful shockwaves shook the entire battlefield. Daluan Ruozan imperceptibly creased his brow at this sight. From what he could see, Huoshu Huizong would clearly not be able to overcome Wang Yan in the short term. Dusong Mangpoj, go! Daluan Ruozan abruptly ordered. Dusong Mangpoj said nothing, but his eyes were fixed on the area where the demonic emperor old man was battling with Kateba. His fists were clenched and sharp light was flitting through his eyes. I know what you're thinking, but now is not the time. Reckless actions will make all our efforts meaningless, Daluan Ruozan sternly said. Understood. Dusong Mangpoj took in a deep breath, calmed his mind, and began to ride toward the 9-dragon blood war banner. In a clattering of armor, he swept past Daluan Ruozan and vanished into the distance. Bastard! Mamluk Commander Ibak was also watching the battlefield. Seeing Qutayba, Abu Muslim, and Huoshu Huizong all being stopped by the Great Tang, had made his face a sheet of ice and filled his eyes with an overwhelming desire to kill. Hear my order. All soldiers, move out. I don't believe that there's a formation that my Mamelukes can't break. Ibak snatched at a nearby warhorse and mounted it. Clang! As Ibak's right thigh pressed against the horse, an enormous halo erupted from his body with a metallic clatter and spread to all the Mamelukes. Pharaoh Halo! This dazzling and dark red halo exhibited twice the power in Ibak's hands than in Faisal's. Clang clang clang. Buffed by the true supreme power of the Pharaoh Halo, the speed, dexterity, and defensive capabilities of the Mamelukes began to soar. Ibak's gaze was as sharp as a blade as he glared at the 9-dragon blood war banner. With a wave of his sword, the 7,000-some Mamelukes charged forward. Clang! Not long after Ibak departed, Ziad took in a deep breath, gripped the ocean ring, and mounted his own warhorse. I'd like to see just how capable you are, just how many of us you can stop. The fires of rage had stirred in Ziad's mind. The Arabs were a proud and confident people. This battle was no longer about seizing a strategic fortress of the Silk Road. This was a clash between Arabia and the Great Tang, between West and East, a battle of wills, strength, and self-confidence. No matter what, Arabia could not lose to these eastern countries. Niai! Ziad swiftly vanished from beneath the black Arabian war banners, plunging into the churning battlefield. Ziad has moved out. Leave him to me. Chang Qianli took out his sword as he looked into the distance. He had been paying attention to the other side this entire time, and he had immediately noticed Ziad moving out. This was not the first time they had exchanged blows. Chang Qianli knew Ziad's martial arts and fighting style like the back of his hand, so no one was better than him for holding Ziad down. Wang Chong nodded and quickly turned his gaze to Ibak and his 7,000 Mamelukes, followed by the Celestial Wolf Cavalry and Mutri Great Cavalry, who had also noticed the change in the situation. In yesterday's battle, the Mutri Great Cavalry and Celestial Wolf Cavalry had suffered the most losses. Although they were all top-class cavalry, their weapons and equipment were clearly lacking compared to the Mamelukes and the Wuxian Cavalry, which was the primary reason for their losses. But even so, 3 forces together still numbered 12,000 men. Wuxian Cavalry, hear my order. Follow me. Wang Chong's eyes flashed with cold light as he gave the order. Ibak had moved out, and his 7,000 Mamelukes bolstered by his halos were a powerful and intimidating force. This was the true Pharaoh Halo, and Cui Piaoqi and Banahan would not be enough to stop them. Let's see which is stronger, the true Pharaoh Halo or the Azura Hell Formation. With a fierce look in his eyes, Wang Chong galloped out from under the Tang banner. Niai! The white-hoofed shadows' cries resounded over the battlefield as Wang Chong charged out from the steel walls. Clang! A massive halo with a radius of 10-some meters exploded from under Wang Chong's feet. Sinister and dreadful, it swept out like a storm and spread to all the Wuxian cavalry. Awoo! The temperature in a range of tens of thousands of feet suddenly plunged while chilly winds swept over the earth. Frightening howls suddenly rang out in everyone's ears, the wails and screams of countless resentful spirits. Everyone who heard this sound felt a fear that came from the very depths of their souls. Gallop! Hooves thundered past the first defense line and toward the battlefield. In a churning cloud of dust, Wang Chong led all the Wuxiang cavalry like an unstoppable comet toward Ibak and the three supreme cavalry forces of three empires. Daluan Ruozhen had been paying close attention to this battle the entire time. When he saw Wang Chong leading the 7,000 Wuxiang cavalry with a momentum that was not one bit weaker than the three other major cavalry forces, he couldn't help but show a hint of concern. There was no going back for Yusang, and the Arabs had also invested a large number of soldiers, so this battle could not be lost. No matter what, they had to destroy the 9-Dragon Blood War banner, the Tang's greatest support. But the Tibetans had already sent all of their commanders, and the three empires no longer had many great generals. Other than Governor Osman of Cairo, who was still nervously observing the situation and ready to enter the fray at any moment, there was only, "Ha ha ha. It seems like I'm the only one who has yet to enter the battlefield." Before Daluan Ruozhen could say anything, he was interrupted by brazen laughter. Duwu Sili seemed to have predicted what was going to be said, his horse taking several paces forward. Daluan Ruozhen was so stunned that he was momentarily speechless. Duwu Sili was a shrewd fellow who would always choose to hide until he couldn't hide anymore. Moreover, his every move and action was usually for the sake of some goal. But now, before anything had even been said, Duwu Sili had volunteered himself. This had truly caught Daluan Ruozhen by surprise. For the first time, Daluan Ruozhen couldn't tell what Duwu Sili was up to. "Hiya!" Duwu Sili bellowed, his horse neighing and armor clattering as he rode his glossy-maned black steed sweeping past Daluan Ruozhen and into the battlefield. "It seems like I'm the only one left to deal with this." At this moment, the only person left behind the defense line was the Wuxiang village chief. Although the Wuxiang village chief was very strong, he was still very old, even older than the demonic emperor old man. This was also why Wang Chong had left him for the very last. Moreover, even though he was a formidable martial artist, he was no master of commanding soldiers. At the very least, the Wuxiang village chief could not lead the Wuxiang cavalry in a charge. Thus, in the end, he was the only one left to deal with Duwu Sili. The Wuxiang village chief's white cane paused for a moment, and then he emerged from the defense line. Bang! The moment the Wuxiang village chief stepped beyond the steel walls, the winds gusted and a destructive attack shot toward the Wuxiang village chief as fast as lightning. Boom! In the blink of an eye, it had struck the stellar energy around the Wuxiang village chief. Through the immense shockwave, everyone could clearly see that what had attacked the Wuxiang village chief was an arrow as thick as a finger and more than 5 feet long. This arrow had left a white scar in the air that dragged on for 20-some meters and was still in the process of closing up. From this, one could see that the person who had loosed this arrow was absurdly powerful. But even more astonishing was what happened to the arrow when it struck the Wuxiang village chief. They could all see that this long arrow seemed to have encountered some unseen barrier. It was frozen in the air, unable to advance a single inch. Crick-crack. The 5-foot-long arrow began to splinter starting from its tip. A moment later, the arrow forged from deep-sea Xian metal had exploded into powder. And even at the very end, the arrow hadn't been able to get within even 3 feet of the Wuxiang village chief. Buzz! This sight left many Arab, Tibetan, and Western Turk generals stunned. This white-haired elder of the Great Tang had to be over 70 and was walking around on a cane, appearing ready to fall over at any moment. No one had expected him to be so powerful that simply his external stellar energy would be able to stop a 5-foot arrow. The Wuxiang village chief said nothing, only raised his head and looked at the distant Shamask. Shamask also had a stunned expression on his face. He had never expected this old man to be so powerful that even an arrow fired by a brigadier general like him wouldn't be able to injure a single hair. Ha! The Wuxiang village chief sighed as he extended a finger from out of his sleeve and lightly flicked. Pop! A moment later, a halberd sticking up from the corpses of a few Arab horsemen nearby suddenly flew into the air, guided by some invisible energy to rapidly shoot toward Shamask. Not good! Just a moment ago, the Wuxiang village chief had raised a hand, and over the vast distance, Shamask had barely been able to see that his sleeve had shaken a little, but he had no idea what the Wuxiang village chief had actually done. But now, Shamask felt an extreme danger that made his skull feel like it was going to explode. With no time to think, Xianxia threw himself backward and awkwardly rolled off his horse. Boom! Just as Xianxia rolled off his horse, a broken halberd swept over the back of his horse and stabbed into the army behind him. Boom! The halberd's impact created a massive explosion. In the explosive shockwave, several dozen Arab cavalry didn't even have time to scream before they were blown to bits, even their armor and scimitars pulverized into powder. Xianxia instantly broke into a cold sweat. Even he could easily kill several dozen Arab cavalry with a single move, but pulverizing their armor and weapons was simply impossible. If he hadn't reacted so quickly and rolled off his horse, he would probably be a corpse by now. Ni! Just as Xianxia was breathing a sigh of relief, he suddenly heard the dying scream of a horse. Xianxia turned in shock and was just in time to see the warhorse that had accompanied him for 10-some years drop to the ground. As for the saddle, it had somehow disappeared. Xianxia's face became ghastly pale. While Xianxia was reeling in shock, there was a flash of light in the distance. Gallop! Wuxia, using the celestial wolf's divine procession, was riding through the air. A storm in human form that charged toward the 9-dragon blood war banner and the Wuxiang village chief. He exuded a heroic aura, his black cape snapping in the wind and his sharp eyes making the weak-willed quail in fear. Little friend, please hold. As Wuxia charged forward, a white-haired figure holding a cane suddenly appeared in front of him. No one knew how the Wuxiang village chief had appeared there. He had seemed to encounter no obstructions on his journey, and the many Arab cavalry who were now behind him were completely baffled. The celestial wolf Great General Wuxia was famous amongst both the Western Turks and the people of the Central Plains, but in the mouth of the Wuxiang village chief, he was just a little friend. But in terms of age, Wuxia truly was much younger than him. Hey! Wuxia's black Turkic steed stopped in the air, its mane wildly blowing in the wind. Wuxia's own hair was also being blown about by the gale. At the sight of the Wuxiang village chief, an unfathomable and wicked smile passed over Wuxia's face. The Wuxiang village chief squinted, but just when he thought that Wuxia would unleash some powerful attack, boom! Before the Wuxiang village chief could react, Wuxia and his horse suddenly drew a massive arc through the air and began to charge back into the rear at lightning speed. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. This, despite all that the Wuxiang village chief had experienced in his long life. Even though he was at an age where he was barely moved by what went on around him, he was still left dumbfounded. Wuxia had come with such a heroic air, and the Wuxiang village chief had already been prepared to fight a major battle. But to his surprise, at the final moment, Wuxia had chosen to run. What is Wuxia doing? At this moment, let alone the Wuxiang village chief, even the deputy next to Dalawan Ruozhen was left befuddled. Dalawan Ruozhen said nothing. His brow was also covered in a gloomy cloud. What Wuxia is doing is no longer important, Dalawan Ruozhen suddenly declared after a few moments of thought. Whether he runs or fights, he succeeded at his goal. Ah! The deputy froze in surprise. In the distance, the Wuxiang village chief was still trying to determine what Wuxia had been scheming when a panicked shout suddenly rang out over the battlefield. Not good. It's the governor of Cairo, Osman. The Wuxiang village chief's body shivered as he turned his head. In the distance, a stalwart and muscular figure had suddenly appeared in front of the 9-dragon blood war banner. This figure was so large and bulky that it was somewhat like a bear's. But this person had hidden his aura so well that no one had noticed as he traveled through the crowd. Only now did he choose to fiercely unleash his energy. Not good. In shock, the Wuxiang village chief immediately understood. Wuxia had never been afraid to fight. Rather, he had been luring the tiger from the mountain. His goal had never been to fight with him, but to lure him away from the target. Bzzz. The Wuxiang village chief turned around and immediately began to journey back. It wasn't merely the Wuxiang village chief who had noticed what had happened. Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and Wang Yan had also seen what was happening. But it was all too late. Osman had begun to move even earlier than Wuxia. Right before Wuxia had entered the battlefield, the governor of Cairo had surreptitiously vanished from underneath his Black Nile war banner. Wuxia had succeeded in drawing the attention of the Wuxiang village chief, allowing the furtive Osman to reach the 9-dragon blood war banner. Ha ha ha! Nothing but ants. Once I seize this banner, let me see how all of you can still fight back. Governor Osman rode upon a black Arabian steed, his beard trembling and his entire body bursting with energy. No matter how many tricks or ritual tools the great Tang used, the West would emerge victorious over the East. In the end, Arabia would carry the day. Stop him! Don't let him get close! The reaction of the Divine Martial Army, Divine Prison Army, Roaring Tiger Army, and all the rest of the Tang elite armies to the sight of Osman appearing out of nowhere like some ghost was one of panicked roars and pale faces. In a flash, the soldiers raised their swords and began to converge on Osman. General Wang, General Du, let's work together. We can't let him threaten the war banner. The unfathomable air of dread around Osman had Zhao Fengchen grimacing. Purely in terms of cultivation, this great general had undoubtedly reached an extremely high level. He was even on par with the 3 grand marshals of the imperial army. Zhao Fengchen instantly felt an unprecedented sense of danger. Boom! Without hesitation, Zhao Fengchen gripped his earth scar with both hands and used his most powerful technique. Lightning Fury. Starving wolf devours the moon. White tiger holds the heavens. At almost the same time, Wang Sili, Du Wuwei, and several other commanders abandoned their own opponents and lunged at Osman. Their various powerful techniques shot toward Osman like lightning bolts. Ignorant. Surrounded by a sea of elite Tang soldiers as well as Zhao Fengchen, Wang Sili, and Du Wuwei, Osman only gave them a disdainful glance. No matter how many of these foes there were, not even if they were the strongest brigadier generals, unless they had broken through that threshold, they would never be able to truly contend against an imperial great general. A moment later, a massive storm of destruction erupted from his body. Crocodilian calamity. In an explosion of light, Osman used one of his most powerful techniques. Instantly, light began to twist and a vast black torrent appeared where Osman was standing. In the middle of this black flood, 2 sharp and savage eyes opened, and then a massive crocodile more than 100 feet long awoke from its slumber. The god of the Nile. This was one of the most revered gods in Cairo and in all of Egypt. It was said that between the 3rd and 6th month of every year, this god of the Nile would awaken and unleash a massive and calamitous flood that would deluge tens of thousands of fields and houses. Osman's crocodilian calamity was derived from the essence of this legend. Once Osman used this technique, he would be like the raging waters of the Nile, endlessly crashing against his foes in wave after wave, each blow imbued with destructive power. With this technique, Osman had succeeded in killing countless top-class experts of the Sasana dynasty. The unique energy of his attacks had pulverized the armor of his foes. Bang! This one technique immediately caused a chorus of screams. In the face of Osman's unstoppable flood of black energy, countless soldiers of the Tang elite armies were sent flying. Even with the power of the 9-dragon blood war banner, even when empowered by 9 halos, these soldiers were still unable to contend against a top-class imperial great general like Osman. Their attempts to attack and defend were simply laughable. As for Zhao Fengchen, Wang Sili, and Du Wuwei, they were only able to hold for a few moments before they too were blown away by the mountain-toppling momentum of Osman's attack. Plush! The 3 vomited blood in the air, their faces turning as white as paper. With a single palm, Osman had succeeded in cracking their ribs. Everyone, hear my order. Charge with me. Osman's eyes flashed with cold light. After creating a gap in the 9-dragon blood formation, he did not immediately chase after Zhao Fengchen, Du Wuwei, and Wang Sili, but instead gathered his men so that they could charge through the gap together. The Arabs still had many elite soldiers gathered around the 9-dragon blood formation, including the soldiers of the Revelation Army, Blood Beast Army, and Death Army. These armies were all available for Osman to mobilize. On this battlefield, the Arabs, Tibetans, and Western Turks still had the advantage in numbers. Osman's mind immediately became extremely calm. The primary objective in this battle was not to kill and wound the Tang, but to destroy the 9-dragon blood war banner. Only by the destruction of the war banner would the Tang formation fall apart and cease to be a threat to the Arab soldiers. Buzz! The black and red banner was reflected in Osman's eyes. Without any hesitation, Osman shot through the gap toward the center of the formation, toward the motionless black-armored guard. "Release!" Su Hanshan roared. He had sensed the danger from the front and ordered his ballista army to fire on the governor of Cairo. His expression was cold and his eyes were emotionless. The situation on the battlefield was complex and constantly changing. More importantly, Osman had relied on his formidable strength to break into the center of the 9-dragon blood formation. He was surrounded by Tang warriors, and using Tang ballistae at this distance might not just fail to wound Osman, but was also likely to kill Tang soldiers. A normal person would never dare to use Tang ballistae at a time like this. But Su Hanshan had not only used them, he had used them without hesitation. Seeking death, the howling ballista bolts approaching him caused Osman's eyes to turn cold and cruel. Rather than avoid these ballista bolts, Osman chose to charge right in and push through with sheer strength. A steely energy exploded out of Osman's body, and even these Tang ballista bolts which could pierce through stellar energy were unexpectedly knocked aside. Even Su Hanshan slightly grimaced when he saw Osman knock away all the ballista bolts. But it was too late for Su Hanshan to do anything else. Osman had succeeded in breaking through the layers of defense and was now just a few dozen feet from the black-armored guard. For someone of Su Hanshan's cultivation to be able to launch a round of attacks and shave away at the strength of a great general like this was quite excellent, but a second round of attacks was simply out of the question. Now! Hand over the war banner and die for me. Now that he was finally in front of the black-armored guard, Osman coldly smiled at the banner holder like he was looking at prey waiting to be killed. Boom! A black ball of light shot out from Osman's fingers, rapidly swelling to 100 times its original size as it flew toward the black-armored guard. Wonderful! Time seemed to stop for a moment as the Arab soldiers both near and far, and even Daluan Ruozan, Huashu Huaitsong, Dusong Mangpoj and Abu Muslim, all showed a hint of relief on their faces. Although there had been many twists and turns, they had finally achieved their objective. Anyone so close to someone of Osman's cultivation was essentially doomed. It was over. As long as they could seize that banner, the Great Tang would be in no state to stop the combined attack of the Arab, Tibetan, and Western Turkic forces. A single thought remained in Daluan Ruozan's mind as he stood beneath the white yak banner, the matter of Wuxia having been completely cast to the back of his mind. The course of this battle was about to be reversed. The moment Osman succeeded was the moment that the Great Tang was defeated. As one side waned, the other would wax. While the Arabs, Western Turks, and Tibetans would rally, the morale of the Tang soldiers would plunge. Not good. The 9-dragon blood war banner is going to be destroyed. Hurry and save General Li. The black-armored guard appeared insignificant in the face of Osman's mighty attack, a drop in the ocean, and all the Tang soldiers became stricken with fear and worry. In an instant, countless soldiers heedlessly charged at Osman. Niai. In the distance, Wang Chong had been preparing to engage in a fierce battle with Ibak. But at this moment, he suddenly turned around and began to charge toward the 9-dragon blood war banner. Gao Xianji, Chang Qianli, and the Wuxiang village chief all did their utmost to try and stop Osman. But all their actions at this point were too late. No matter what they did, it would be of no help to the situation. At this point, the atmosphere on the battlefield was maximally saturated with tension. But just when it seemed like the black-armored guard was about to die to Osman's attack, "Barbarian of the Western regions, you overestimate your strength." Just when Osman believed that he had firmly grasped victory, a deep voice devoid of emotion resounded in his ear. The black-armored guard had been motionless this entire time. But at this moment he suddenly raised his head and stared at Osman. Instantly, Osman felt an indescribable feeling. At Osman's level of cultivation, no one should have had enough time to raise their head when being attacked from such short range. "This is impossible," Osman mentally roared. A moment later, he felt an intense danger. Bang! At this moment, a palm shot forward in a flash of light. This palm immediately shattered Osman's black torrent and thrust into his chest. This energy was so enormous that Osman felt like the entire world had lost its color. All living beings in the world appeared insignificant in front of this palm. Crack. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl as Osman heard a crisp crack from his chest. The Nile battle armor, which he had spent a great deal of effort and resources, as well as made countless promises, to finally obtain from a member of the imperial household, instantly splintered into pieces. This armor that even the 3 great generals of the Sassanid dynasty had failed to break had been shattered by a single palm from this black-armored guard. Plush! Osman's entire body trembled as he vomited blood, and then an unstoppable power as vast as the seas sent him flying outward and into the ground. Boom! The ground seemed to be made of paper from how easily it cracked, sank, and exploded, sending large slabs of stone flying into the air from the force of Osman's impact. Before these slabs of stone could get very far, they exploded in the air once more into hundreds of thousands of tiny stones. As the dust settled, everyone could clearly see the blood-drenched figure of Osman, surrounded by shattered pieces of his armor. Plush! As Osman got off the ground, his body trembled again and he vomited more blood. His hard and determined face instantly became as white as a sheet of paper. Shock! Everyone who saw this sight was shocked until they couldn't be shocked anymore. That black-armored guard in the center of the formation, who hadn't seemed very strong, had actually managed to heavily wound Osman with a single palm. Everyone felt like their world had been completely turned upside down. This is impossible. At this moment, no one was more stunned than Abu Muslim. His fingers were clenched so hard together that the bones were about to break. As Osman's comrade in arms, Abu Muslim had a keen understanding of his strength. He didn't even dare to believe that Osman had been heavily injured by a single palm. Dalwin Ruozan was just as stunned. His heart was a block of ice, and it felt like he had been the one that had been sent flying, not Osman. An Imperial Great General. They actually sent an Imperial Great General to serve as the banner holder for the 9-Dragon Blood War banner. Dalwin Ruozan's lips trembled, his mind in complete disorder. Qutayba had fought against the mysterious old man. Abu Muslim had lured away Gao Shenji. Ziad had lured away Chang Qianli. Huashu Huizong had lured away Wang Yan. In the end, Governor Osman went alone to slay the banner holder and break the 9-Dragon Blood War banner. Everything had gone according to Dalwin Ruozan's plan. But he had never expected the black-armored guard holding the banner to be a variable on his own. This unremarkable banner holder had turned out to be even stronger than the governor of Cairo. Deathly stillness. At this moment, the entire battlefield had fallen silent. Everyone had been left speechless by their shock. Even Wang Chong was dumbstruck, let alone anyone else. Hand over your life. A voice broke the silence. The only one who wasn't shocked by this result was probably the black-armored guard himself. Boom! The guard stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Osman. But before the black-armored guard could strike, boom! Osman's body swelled with bloody light. The black-armored guard squinted as he prepared to receive Osman's counterattack. But things turned out very differently from what he had expected. Just who are you? Go! The first sentence was a question for the black-armored guard. But when he said the word go, Osman immediately transformed into a bloody streak of light and fled like a stray dog. Humph! Blood escape! A cold light flitted through the black-armored guard's eyes. But this time he stepped back, showing no intent of pursuing Osman. This world was host to many secret arts that could stimulate one's potential and give one a large boost in strength for a short period of time, with the blood escape of the martial arts world being one of them. Osman definitely hadn't used the blood escape art, but there was no doubt that they achieved the same thing. I'll let you go for now, but in the coming battles, will you be able to step forward? The black-armored guard's eyes gleamed as he drew back his gaze from Osman. He resumed his position, standing motionless in the center of the 9-Dragon Blood formation, appearing entirely unaffected by the events just now. To the holder of the 9-Dragon Blood War banner, the most important duty was to hold the banner, not kill the enemy. The banner would be with the men, and it would only fall when he died. This was the conviction and law that each generation of the black armored guards had cleaved to. As Osman fled, the entire battlefield seemed to awaken. All the Tang soldiers immediately exploded with cheers. Kill! Kill these Arabs! Charge! Kill them all! No one had expected the banner holder to have such profound strength, or the great Tang to be hiding another imperial great general, one that was even stronger than Osman. The Tang morale immediately soared to the heavens as countless Tang soldiers joined the 20,000 Tang elites in charging at the Arabs. Load! Ready! Release! At the same time, Su Hanshan was also revitalized and began to issue a string of orders. The 5,000 ballistae joined the 9 Dragon Blood formation in charging at the Arabs, Western Turks, and Tibetans. More and more soldiers poured out of the first defense line and entered the intense battlefield. This time, the Great Tang was no longer just holding its defensive positions. The entire army came to life like a massive machine and began a full-out offensive against the Arabs. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Bolts filled the sky, piercing through the Arabs and drenching the earth with their blood. Shocked and panicked, the Arabs were quickly felled and their corpses began to pile up. Kill! None was more lethal on this battlefield than the 9 Dragon Blood formation. Clang, clang, clang. The Tongluo Great Halo, Xuanwu Halo, Dragon Stallion Halo, Divine Prison Halo, Divine Martial Halo, Iron Wall Halo, Azure Martial Halo. 9 top-class war halos, dazzling and brilliant, boosted the power of the 20,000 Tang elites. At this moment, this army was the strongest in the continent, in the world. Not even the most powerful army on the Arab side, the Revelation Army, was any match for them. Go! Hurry! This time, the Arabs were truly in a complete rout. The damage Osman's heavy injury had done to Arab morale was simply unimaginable. All of them had originally believed that they still had the upper hand when it came to the number of great generals, but now all their advantages had been lost. The Great Tang had an equal number of great generals to the 3 empires. Although the Arabs, Tibetans, and Western Turks still had more soldiers, their army had lost the will to fight. All the Arab soldiers were fleeing from that ancient black and red banner. Retreat! Retreat! Everyone, retreat! Abu Muslim roared. His furious, unwilling, but also helpless voice rang out over the battlefield. In the air, Abu Muslim and his Eye of the Demon God Gauntlet were far from finished with their battle against Gao Shenji. Although Gao Shenji's strength had swelled, he was still not at the level where he could defeat Abu Muslim. But even though the battle between great generals had still not been decided, Abu Muslim was compelled to order a retreat. Boom! A horn instantly began to blow from the rear of the Arab army. But when compared to the loud and energetic signal to attack, this one was fraught with panic. Rumble! Dust billowed into the air as the army began to retreat even faster. The other areas of the battlefield were also affected. Ziad, Aibak, Huashu Huaitsong, and Dusong Mangpoj all began to draw back, no longer in the mood to fight. In this battle, the Great Tang's greatest weakness was the 9 Dragon Blood formation. If the banner that held down the formation could be destroyed, the Tang army would fall apart on its own. But when that black armored guard attacked, this weakness immediately disappeared. The greatest gap in the Great Tang's defense was thus filled, and it was now Arabia that was on the back foot. As with Osman severely wounded, the 3 empires had lost a great general.